right now you could almost make a movie called The Fast and the Fearful. The fast would be the the B2C and the fearful the B2B, because we're cranking out AI commercials right now from Nike to Burger King, and they're testing, they're testing, throw it on a YouTube short or TikTok and see what happens. If it doesn't, make a different one, keep it moving. Meanwhile, B2B is sitting back and waiting to see what can happen. And, they'll be talking to their lawyers for the next year.
All right, welcome to The Brand Behavior, the podcast where we delve into the latest marketing and branding trends to help your business grow. I'm your host, Jonte Delane, and in today's episode, we're diving into the world of direct-to-consumer and business-to-business marketing. Now, we're exploring what B2B marketers can learn from innovative strategies of consumer brands. From personalization to leveraging technology, we'll uncover actionable insights to evaluate your marketing game and take it to the next level. Today, our guests are Ailey Judge, co-founder and CMO at Content Monster, a content marketing agency specializing in B2B brand growth through multimedia content. Hey, Ailey, how you doing?
Doing good, Jonte. Thanks for having me.
For sure. Next, we have Carla Johnson. She is a globally recognized keynote speaker, author, and marketing strategist known for her work in the innovation and storytelling space, and she helps B2B marketers challenge the status quo. How you doing, Carla?
Hey, good. Thanks for having me. It's nice to join you both today.
All right, so we're going to jump right in. In recent years, D2C brands have revolutionized the way we think about consumer engagement and brand loyalty. With the rise of digital transformations and the need for more personalized B2B interactions, it's time for B2B marketers to borrow a page from the DTC playing book. We're going to take a look at how these B2B marketers can leverage some plays from D2C campaigns to help their marketing. All right, so let's talk about personalization and consumer experience. Now, we know personalization is key, but how can brands implement personalization in their content marketing strategy to better engage with their clients? Lee, what are your thoughts there?
Well, oftentimes we hear the terms personalization, and the first thing we go to is the old school things of, adding "Hi, Jim" into your email, or just adding people's names into things. But I think what we've evolved, or we should have evolved to understand, is that personalization also means understanding your customer enough to talk directly to them and not so much about your product. And so if you can understand what psychographic they're in, what do they care about, what do they feel, what's important to them, then it isn't a matter of injecting their name or their city. It's more about injecting what they feel, what they care about into your content. And then when they receive it, it'll feel personal.
That makes sense. And what about you, Carla? How can storytelling be used to create personalized brand narratives in the B2B space?
I like what Lee said, because I think that's the basis for storytelling, is that you really have to know, who do you want to tell a story to? And I think sometimes as B2B marketers, what we do is we say, like, we have a label, maybe a title or a persona or something like that. And I think when it comes to storytelling, one of the things that consumer-oriented companies do really, really well is that they create an experience around the story. So I'm in Colorado, in Denver, and it's almost October, the day that we're recording this. And one of the things that I see every day when I wake up and go for a walk is snow on the top of the mountains. And one of the companies that I think does just an incredible job of bringing a consumer into their story and then creating an experience around it, Epic. It's an app that you can put on your phone. And if you're a skier or a snowboarder or a snow sports person, when you use that app, you immediately go into the world of skiing, and it tracks a lot of things like how many runs did you do, and you can compare yourself to other people, and it makes it a little bit more competitive. So it's not just about buying a ski pass to go ski. It's about they're able to bring me into the story of skiing and how I perform and things like that. And I think one of the really, really great opportunities that B2B companies have that marketers haven't necessarily taken the advantage of is, how do we create that experience by knowing our buyers, like Lee talked about, like what do they actually care about that has nothing to do with what we sell? And then how do we create a storyline around that? And how do we, encompass that all in an experience? I think that's a really, really powerful opportunity.
Yeah. But what about the nuances of the B2B industry versus B2C? I mean, naturally, we have B2C companies that focus on having more of, let's say, an emotional appeal, right? And then we have the B2B with, I would say, more rational appeal because they're essentially, those decision makers are focused on ROI versus maybe from a D2C or B2C brand when their consumers are more focused on value, right? What are the nuances that some of the B2B brands need to consider when communicating their brand story?
Well, I'll give an example of something that I'm dealing with right now with a client. It's a B2B customer, and they are concerned with when we communicate on social media, how do we segment that and only say certain things to certain people? Well, you can. I mean, if you're on LinkedIn and you have an audience of 100,000 people and you speak to them, you can't say, well, this is only for those who buy this product or those who only buy that product. It's just your audience. And sometimes businesses, because of how especially complicated larger ones can be, you may have different sales teams who sell different people, marketing markets to different products. You have these divisions internally, but to the customer, you're just that one company. And so as a company trying to personalize their message, it gets complicated. In fact, it's hard for them to do. Whereas D2C can say, look, we are targeting this team to people who buy shoes. And you can target a lot easier and say, to the personalization may be something like when you're in your when you're in your 40s and it takes you 30 minutes to feel warmed up in the morning, don't you wish you had this kind of coffee, right? At that moment, you feel like, wow, they're talking to me. I'm in my 40s. I love coffee. I'm sluggish this morning. That's personalization. But if you put it in the corporate B2B sense, it'd be almost like saying, well, do you wake up in the morning? Well, yeah, we all wake up in the morning. And that's where it stops. It's not personalized, right? That's about as personal as B2B gets. Sometimes we want to just be so broad, we're afraid to be specific to any one customer, thinking that we might offend another customer, right? So we may say, well, maybe they don't drink coffee, maybe they drink tea in the morning. Let's not do it at all because we might offend the tea drinkers. B2B messes up right there. That's where it gets complicated while we have this conversation of how can B2B be more like direct to consumer, because B2B wants to be too general too often and play it too safe.
Yeah.
Oh man, I couldn't agree with you more, Lee. I think one of the things that B2B does, exactly the example that you just shared, they make their audiences walk the cliff, like walk the plank. They get you just to a point and then they just leave you there hanging. So like, do you wake up? Yep. Okay. In a conversation, but really looking at like, what's the narrative that we want to have, like a conversation over a long period of time. And I think one of the easiest things that B2B marketers can use to humanize the story that we don't think of is like, what are the words that you use? And if you read the words in your campaign or whatever kind of content you're producing, are these actually words that you would use if you and I were just sitting here talking about this? Now, if we put our conversation that we're having right now into the corporate environment, I might use a lot of terms like mission critical and I better utilize things more efficiently and things like that. But we don't talk like that as real human beings. And I think just the little bit of infusing our personality as a B2B brand through the words that we use can really go a long way to make us sound and appear human in that way. And I think that ability to understand what would one actual person say to another actual person when we're having this kind of conversation, it's pretty eye-opening.
Yeah. And I think too, some of the B2B brands are also having their CMOs or CEOs kind of speak to be in the forefront of their brands as well in terms of communicating the brand positioning. But what are some ways that we would be a B2B brand would be able to infuse some of that personality into communication that addresses all those individual stakeholders that they're looking to target? Because when I think about a general D2C funnel, and where you have different communications that are disseminated to each phase, people who are in different phases of the funnel. But that's speaking to essentially one person, right? But from the B2B end, you have, probably the gatekeeper, the assistant, the department manager, the procurement manager, right? All of this, the communication needs to be sent to those individuals at a certain cadence. But how do you fuse in the brand personality into all those communications that reach out to those individual stakeholders?
Well, I think for B2B, often you mentioned creating content like for the funnel, and oftentimes B2B begins focusing on the consideration stage and the action stage deep down in the funnel, because the awareness stage is where we talked about earlier. Things are just so bland in general, so I don't want to offend anyone. And B2C companies can be much more personally individual in terms of their content and create much more content. I'm working with clients now, trying to get them to lighten up a bit on their top of funnel and do more content and not do the super Hollywood polished videos they do for the bottom of the funnel, which are necessary for that consideration or action stage, but they don't want to ease up a little bit and do things that are faster, more human, has some flaws in it that are more attractive to the top of the funnel, that they can afford to do hundreds of videos rather than that one or two polished. And we have clients who say, hey, we're doing great. We do one video every month. I'm like, well, let's look at our competitive analysis here. Your competitor's doing 10 videos per day. They're like, oh, well, those are just video shorts. Yes, they are. They're touches to their consumers. They're sending out 10, 20 touches to their consumers. Their awareness phase is dominating because they're always out there. They have tons of content, and they're being more personable because they have more chances to talk to different kinds of people. You mentioned earlier about they're afraid to offend one part of the audience. If you do enough content, you can hit all those parts of the audience. And then when they get down to the consideration stage, then you can be more specific to speak to just them. And because they're further down the funnel, it makes more sense to spend more money on them because they're closer to taking action.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more, Lee. I think one of the things that I most commonly have as a conversation with clients is when you got up this morning, like what did you do, and go through their days. And, maybe they stopped to get a breakfast on the way to the office, or stopped to get a coffee, or, they ran an errand. And then throughout their day, what did they do as they made decisions? And then they went to lunch and all these things. And I asked them, okay, did you consciously say, okay, like put on a hat right now. Now I'm a consumer making a decision. Okay, now I'm at work and I'm going to buy something that is related to my company. So now I put on a B2B hat. And we don't think that way as people. What we do is we just look at, okay, what hits our needs, what emotionally connects with us in that way. And those short, real life kind of quick videos are what people connect to. And if you ask clients, what do you spend time consuming all day long? Is it that perfectly polished content? Or is it some of this quick hit, more entertaining, more interesting, thought-provoking sort of things that you don't need 20, 30, 45 minutes to consume? A 60-second video can do a lot to create that storyline that just keeps people watching and watching and watching. And all of a sudden you have an amazing attention with that audience, but it's interesting and it was short and quick and real.
Yeah. And that feedback loop that B2B brands can get when, like you said, Carla, asking their audience what type of content they want to consume is critical, and it's certainly parallels D2C brands. But of course, ultimately, B2B brands can also benefit from that feedback loop of understanding their clients' needs. So, Lee, what are some effective ways for B2B brands to engage directly with their clients through multimedia content?
Well, so not to pitch, but I'm in the middle of writing a book. Actually, it's about finished. And part of the book talks about that. And it comes from the sales team that's more frontline, talking to customers, bringing information back to the marketing team, so the marketing team can create better content that they know resonates and answers the exact questions that the sales team sees the customer asking. So there's your loop right there. And I think direct to consumer does a better job of that because they're always tuned in to what the consumer says. But in B2B, we have these sales and marketing silos where marketing stays in the office and does their marketing thing, sales goes out and does the sales thing, and the communication loop doesn't happen as well. So one of the key things any company can do to improve how they reach their customers is not only listen to the customer, but listen to the parts of the company that touch and have conversations with the customer. And as Carla said earlier, that's where that language of what the customer calls your product even, right? So suppose you're selling houses and all your language says housing, but your customer calls it a home. I mean, you have to find out exactly how your customer relates to, cares about, what language and words they use to describe what you sell. Because often is what B2B does, we talk in our own circles and our own bubbles, and we call it a widget 2000 because we sell those. Meanwhile, the customer says, oh, that's a screwdriver, but we don't say that in our language, right? So there's the loop, is listening to your team and your customers at the same time.
I think Michael Brenner had an interesting example that ties in with what Lee shared. When he was at SAP, one of the things he looked at was search results. How many people search for the SAP product by name versus how many people search for like a more generic version of their problem that product happened to solve. And I think if we understand what is it that people sit down and look for to answer their problems, it gives you an incredible resource for the kind of multimedia content to create. And like Lee said, like sales teams are a goldmine, customer service teams also a goldmine, because there you're getting some feedback maybe about the whole sales journey, the customer journey, and looking at what are some of the things that we can help them understand ahead of the game before it gets to a sale that might alleviate some issues after the fact or might help move that sales decision along a lot faster. And I think that like ecosystem of the sales and marketing and customer service groups can be really powerful.
Yeah, and I think some of the challenges that many B2B brands have is connecting those teams together to making sure that their customer service is actually talking to their marketing or have some input, right, to create a feedback loop, a system that efficiently enhances the communication. But what are some ways organizations can do that? Are there some tools, tactics that would help them in that process?
Yeah, so you mentioned those conversations between sales or marketing and the customer. What if you talk to a customer, ask them about your product, and you recorded it? And you got a chance to have a real customer say, well, I like this, I don't like that. You have a salesperson saying, you know what, we thought about that, and we're going to look into implementing that. Or the technologist, the programmer, the engineer saying, we did think about adding that button, but we realized it was in the way of the other button. So we decided to go this way. And turns out our customers like this more. Those kind of conversations captured. These are your subject matter experts, your company leaders, your engineers, the people who actually make the thing and sell the thing and talk to the customers. Capturing those conversations are a gold mine to another customer who's considering your business, because now they get a chance to not hear all the marketing jargon. They get a chance to hear the engineer who built it, the customer who uses it. That is much more convincing than over-jargonated. That's a new word I just made up, I guess. That's a new one. Over-jargonated text written by the marketing department. Have conversations, record the conversations, whether it be video or podcast. Capture those snippets and show it to your prospective customers at the top of the funnel, especially, to build awareness and build trust.
Amen. Like everything he just said, totally agree with.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And so when continue on the theme of storytelling for B2B brands, what are some ways that B2B brands can enhance their brand story and align it to current trends, right? And so you have organizations that want to be aligned with, let's say, some social impact issues and so on, but also make sure that they're still holding true to their original traditional core values, right? What are some ways essentially that these B2B brands can sort of loosen up a little bit and unloosen the tie, if you will?
I grew up in a small town in Northeast Nebraska, like really small, less than 1,000 people, farming community. And one of our big contentious conversations, even as kids growing up, is, are you green or are you red? And green meant John Deere and red meant International Harvester. So we were like definitely brand loyal, like people, green or red, green or red. So I grew up in a green family, John Deere. And I think John Deere has done an amazing job throughout history. I mean, they're one of the icons in the content marketing world. But I think how they've been able to tell a story and remain relevant is so beautiful. And I know like our farm has been in our family for over 100 years. And one of the campaigns that John Deere has is about your land tells a story. And so it can be like, for me, that emotionally connected with me because I think about my great-grandparents, my grandparents, and my parents, and my brother used to farm. And looking at that about the land tells a story from a very emotional perspective for me. And there's an incredible connection between farmers and the land that isn't just about how much is it going to produce. But I think also then with John Deere, it's a beautiful way to talk about how they can help your land tell the story because of all of the technology and the equipment. But if they would have led with all of the details about how their new technology can give you like incredibly detailed information about the production of each square foot, inside the area that you're farming, nobody would have paid attention. But when you start talking about what is the story that the land tells and creating some of these very big emotional type of conversations, it's really beautiful. And then looking at how they talk about the ability to farm forward, we look at sustainability and climate change and the impact of farming and how do we feed a world. And I think it's a nice way that John Deere has been able to elevate itself into a conversation where if they just stuck with that traditional B2B product, and here's what it does and can do, they would not have been able to connect and be relevant, I think, especially relevant forward as they are right now.
I'm glad you mentioned the Team Green, Team Red, 'cause I was on Team Green. I grew up on a farm
Yay.
too. Yeah, and I know we had
farm kids, that's awesome.
Yeah, we had a big giant combine that was definitely John Deere. And this is long before I ever knew that John Deere was like one of the first content marketing stories, right? And I refer to that because they did what I call today adjacent marketing. In other words, you find topics that are adjacent to what you sell, but not what you sell. So if John Deere talks about the weather, every farmer cares about the weather. You can do that and get your full audience's attention without ever talking about a tractor. So whatever you sell, the adjacent content, if you are selling kids' shoes and you talk about playground safety, who cares about playground safety? People with kids, and the kids have shoes. So the best content marketing is adjacent marketing, and John Deere was a good example of that.
And when you guys talked about technology earlier, so let's shift gears into that. When we think about what D2C brands are using in terms of technology versus the B2B companies, when you factor in, let's say for marketing purposes, these D2C companies may be utilizing marketing technology for promotion or amplification, while B2B brands may focus on ROI or social listening or even account-based marketing, right? What are some ways that B2B brands can sort of fuse those two technologies to help them create that brand story that is somewhat similar to what a D2C brand would have?
Right now, you could almost make a movie called The Fast and the Fearful. The fast would be the B2C and the fearful the B2B, because, we're cranking out AI commercials right now from Nike to Burger King, and they're testing, they're testing, throw it on a YouTube short or TikTok and see what happens. If it doesn't, make a different one, keep it moving. Meanwhile, B2B is sitting back and waiting to see what can happen. And, they'll be talking to their lawyers for the next year. Meanwhile, B2C is cranking out tests and they'll know exactly what to do at the end of the year. And B2B is still being careful. Now, I understand you have lots more money, maybe stockholders going on, but I mean, so does Nike, so does, Procter & Gamble. They still have shareholders. But I think there's just a lot more boldness in those departments. And, you have B2B saying, how can we learn from B2C? That's the only answer, is just be a bit more bold and not be so scary. or fearful about trying something new. We're at a place now with AI where you cannot afford, companies are going to find out. They're going to fear around and find out that you can't be slow right now. You've got to test and do things new. And so whether it's an AI generated product demo, whether it's using technology to, I don't know, duplicate your salespeople somehow, companies have to figure out how to utilize the technology or simply get left behind. It's probably cliche, but it's just still true.
I am going to put that sign up on my office, the fast and the fearful,
Fearful.
because it perfectly describes both the consumer and the B2B type audience for marketers. And I think it's like you said, Lee, the consumer company's ability to create, test, iterate fast. Like that's the hallmark of an innovator. And this is something that B2B marketers have an incredible opportunity to do, but they don't have to do this in a vacuum. I think one of the things that we don't realize is, like, let's look at consumer companies who are doing this so well and really like observe some of the details, because we can't copy and paste. That's just ridiculous, and it'll make us look irrelevant and out of touch. But what we can do is learn and experience and observe what these consumer companies are doing, and then ask ourselves, like, how might we translate some of what they're doing into our world in a more relevant way? One, it can really shorten that time to trial. They don't have huge budgets to try everything that they do. And I think that's a big opportunity for B2B marketers is try and experiment and test things on a really, really small scale, like little micro innovation, micro experiments, micro tests. And I think you can learn a lot in a really short amount of time if you just stay consistent with those little bitty baby steps.
Yeah.
There's something else that B2B does is sometimes we don't have our heads up to realize what's changed and what's faster. I'm giving a talk at Content Marketing World this year about remote video production. And the gist of it is we have clients who don't even ask about video because they assume that they know what it costs. And their assumptions are based on 5-10 years ago. And that's like ignoring that things have changed, ignoring that technology has changed, consumer consumption habits have changed. They're ignoring all that and saying, you know what, video is expensive, period. I've been a CMO for 20 years and video is expensive, don't do it. That's before, YouTube Shorts, TikTok, they didn't even exist 5-10 years ago. So meanwhile, our assumptions are not catching up. And that's what happens in B2B, because you have teams that are either strained for finances, and when they ask the upper management for budget for this new thing, upper management is not in touch with new ways of doing things, and they squash it. So that's one of the keys that B2B really has to overcome, is understanding that things are always changing. Things are becoming more efficient, and that you have to always consider what B2C is doing before you squash it and say, oh, it costs too much because it did 5 years ago.
Yeah, I totally get what you say, Lee, about the cost and people's perception of the cost of video. And you may still get squashed in your company when you try some things, but I always say to marketers, like, you have the whole rest of your day. Try your own TikTok channel, like try your own YouTube shorts, like test it and get familiar and comfortable with it on your own, just as a person, because I think your enthusiasm in your own experience, in your own expertise can really go a long ways to help people understand how it can work and why it can work. And I think that ease on camera, even if it's like just a little phone camera or, to do something quick and, in the moment with a customer, I think practice brings that feeling of competence, which can make you feel a little bit more confident when you go to make some of these pieces of content.
Yeah. And what about the setting up the structure of your content creation process? Would you recommend a certain percentage of effort or resource go toward a testing of campaigns? Would you recommend a certain title in-house? Would you recommend, of course, probably outsourcing to experts like you all on the line here? What are your thoughts there in terms of how can a B2B organization structurally set up their marketing and communications departments to create a brand story that is aligned with a D2C? And what are the specific tools, tactics, or structure that should be set up for that department?
I'm pretty opinionated on this because I believe that B2B marketers need to learn how to do it themselves and not outsource it to an agency, which a lot of B2B marketers aren't comfortable with because they don't know how to do this. They're uncomfortable with pushing the limits and status quo kind of thinking or the way we've always done it kind of things. But even if you eventually go to an agency for support, I always say you have to be a knowledgeable and educated consumer of what it is that you buy. And I think there's a lot of B2B marketers who work with an agency and the agency says, oh, like, here's what you should do. And like a lot of smoke and not always a lot of grounding. I'm not saying every agency is like that, but I think unless B2B marketers really understand what's involved and the potential of what's involved, that you may not be able to get everything out of an agency that you want. And then that goes back to your ROI. So if we're doing these trials, we're doing these tests, and we're not getting anything substantial to show progress or that it will work, a lot of times it's because we don't know as B2B marketers what is it that we want to get out of it. So I think just like the little baby step of where to start with all of this before we make it too process heavy is just to start every call that you have. If you have like a team call or a team meeting once a week, start between 5 and 15 minutes and talk about what are you seeing in the consumer market that we should pay attention to. So back to what Lee said about B2B marketers really have their heads down and don't always come up and gasp for air and look at what's going on in the world. But I think the collective of making it clear and understood that paying attention to what is changing, what is going on in the consumer world, and then having a conversation about it, even 5 to 15 minutes as a team, is really incredibly powerful. And that it's actually a neuroscience thing that will kick your brain's activation into saying, okay, they did it. I think we can do it. Now let me go to work and start to figure it out. I think when we get too process heavy too early in the stages of things, it kills the opportunity for ideas and kind of the spontaneity of how ideas come into place. Of course, down the road, you need to make sure that you have some structure because otherwise it's like herding cats. But one of the simple things I say that you can track when I work with clients is have a spreadsheet with 3 columns. 1, how many ideas did you get? 2, how many ideas got moved into production? And 3, how many ideas made it across the end line? Like how many are done and complete? It tells you a lot about what kind of environment are you in? Do you have a boss, or do you have a culture that welcomes ideas, that is willing to try them out, and that's willing to stick with them and work through them until they get executed? Or is it that people don't really have the skills of how to come up with ideas that relate to true, honest business objectives? So obviously, strong opinion on that one.
Well, I really agree with you on the part about the agencies. Even though I own an agency myself, I agree with you. And the reason is because I was a marketer hiring agencies, and I found the same frustrations. In fact, most agencies were good at what they did in terms of creating things, but they didn't understand marketing. They didn't understand the business objectives behind the marketing. And so that's the reason why I created my agency, was to be the agency that I couldn't hire. I just didn't find agencies who understood. They'd say, oh, well, we'll make a video for you, and then just dump it in our laps, not knowing why they created it, what our business intention is. They didn't care what happened beyond that. And so I wanted to have or create an agency where we understood the marketing intention. Like if a marketer asks us to do something, we might push back and say, that won't work, or there won't be much ROI in doing that, or the video you want us to produce won't bring you any leads. Or we push back because we understand the marketing aspect. And you mentioned ideas, and Junte asked about some things that some budget allocation for those things. I think every company should, just like when they have a product they're building, they have a part of the budget for R&D for that product. I think your marketing product, your marketing content should also have some budgets aside for R&D. So research and development for what kind of content is working, what's resonating, what kind of tools and processes we need to have to create the content, what formats work, video or podcast or written, for what channels, TikTok or LinkedIn or YouTube. It's always changing, and you have to experiment to find out what works best for your company. And not just over a week or a month or a quarter. It could be 6 months to a year. But for your business, you need to experiment. And that takes some time and allocation. And oftentimes, especially in B2B, they want to have coin-operated marketing. Put a dime in here, dollar comes out there. It doesn't work that way, especially with content marketing. It takes some experimentation and some time and budget for that to actually happen.
And do you think that many B2B organizations may not have the creative resources in-house to create this content, or even an understanding of their audiences and what content they're consuming to create something long-standing with regard to their brand story? Oftentimes you'll have in-house teams that are creating content, but that content may be off base, or they may not have content infused with other strategic partners or influencers, and then strategy to amplify that content all in concert. And I think that's where some specialties with regard to specific agencies are able to bring to the table. But I do think in order to identify just the abilities of another agency, you have to live it yourself. You have to be that practitioner to really understand what type of agency you can work with. And then with regard to ROI, I think, it just obviously depends upon the level of creativity that the agency is able to come up with, and if it supersedes something that you could have in-house, right? But these are some of the key features or the key considerations that, any brand leader would have in the B2B space. But at the end of the day, it really just kind of boils down to the ROI, especially with regard to B2B. So what are some key metrics that you guys can think about all B2B marketers should factor in when considering their brand story and content amplification?
That's a tough question. And the reason why I say it's tough isn't because I don't want to answer it. It's because that'll be easy to say. No, it's tough because data is evaporating. That's why. The data we used to depend on, I cringe when I think about just maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I was on stage talking about how you can track every click from when you first meet a customer down to a deal. And I had it all mapped out with UTM codes and all kind of cookies and everything. I'd be embarrassed to show that now because the data just isn't there. And it's shrinking. And too often departments hang their hats on data that, won't be here 6 months from now, and they have to move the goalpost. And then you have a marketing team who executives say, oh, well, they always move the goalpost. They really don't know what they're doing. The fact is they're measuring what they have at that moment, but then Apple says we're going to block cookies. Okay, the goalpost moves. Google says we're not going to have cookies. Goalpost moves. Google says, okay, psych, cookies are going to stay. Goalpost moved again. Something goes from likes to being called connects, to being called followers, all these things are always evolving, which makes marketers look stupid because we pin our hats and our KPIs to one particular metric, and it always moves. So we have to know that it will always move. And the data is shrinking because we're getting fewer and fewer ways to track that information. So how do you respond to that? Well, what we say is you look for things like lift. Basically says, where were we yesterday? Where are we today? We may not be able to explain exactly what caused it. There's no such thing as exact attribution. But if you can say, okay, here's our baseline. We get 1,000 website hits per day. And then we started doing this thing, and now we get 2,000 hits per day. Of course, you're going to say, well, we also did many things. Well, let's just do our best to figure out at what points those things happened. And so we can attribute the lift to those things. Not specifically like, we did this campaign and got that many leads, because you can make that report and you can tell your boss, hey, look what happened, but you're lying to yourself. In most cases, you won't have that exact math. Now, what I've seen in my career is you'll have teams who can go years on those kind of KPIs to say, hey, boss, we launched this campaign and we got X number of leads. The boss doesn't know that you launched your campaign during your trade show. So no wonder why the numbers went up. Or because you had a one-hit viral video, numbers went up. but people take credit for that. And that doesn't last long. That's why we have so much turnover, because people hang their hats on the wrong numbers. The thing is, you have to be totally honest about what you can measure and what you can't measure, and keep your statistics broad enough to where when the goalpost moves, when things change, you don't have to change all your reports and all the things that you hung your measurement on because that thing changed. So my answer is a big no answer. I understand that. But overall, you have to understand that the goalpost will move, and you have to make sure whatever you set out to measure, it's broad enough to say, we're doing lots of stuff, and when we didn't do lots of stuff, we didn't get lots of results. Simple as that.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Lee. And I want to go back to something that you included in the question, Junta. And that was about like the creative people tell the story. And I think that's a misconception of B2B marketers, is that there's a specific people, a group of people inside of marketing who kind of own and create that story. And I think the more that B2B marketers, regardless of what your responsibility is on the team, understand the skills of how to tell a story, can really, really be beneficial, because I think that's where the story really gets fragmented. So as Lee was talking about, like if you want to see lift, you have to see consistency and you have to see focus in that story. So when you go back to, green team, here's Lee and I back on the farm, John Deere was super consistent with that bigger, broader story. And with a lot of B2B companies, what you'll see is a shift in strategy, a shift in objectives, and leaders, executives want to see that shift in marketing. So again, there's another element in what Lee was describing for these dynamics that are constantly changing, is the story itself is changing. And if you look at any of the great, most iconic stories that have been told over time, Harry Potter, 7, 8 books, or, 7 that should have been 8 or something like that. This is a long tail story that the person was highly skilled in understanding how to tell and in creating a narrative, a story arc over a long period of time. So I think as we look at all of these elements that bubble up to that narrative, we have to understand and just appreciate that every marketer needs to understand the story and have the skills to be able to tell it, whether you're on ABM or you're on the, brand or social or whatever your role is, because that's a huge part of telling a cohesive story that attracts that attention over the 6, 12, 18 months that it takes for something to really connect and resonate. And I think that's something we don't always understand and look at and appreciate when we're looking at measurement, is how skilled are we at actually telling that story?
We have to have enough guts to say that won't happen. Like if back to the agency thing, or even in-house, if executives say, we want to launch a content marketing campaign, I'll give you a budget for that. I want you to show me the results that you have in 3 months. You have to be able to say, it doesn't work that way. It's not going to happen. We can implement it, and we can tell you what we've done so far, but don't set yourself up to expect results in 3 months. It's not going to happen. And so too many marketers, I think, especially in B2B, for rightfully so, they're worried about their jobs. So they're going to promise, we'll show you results. We're here. We're being paid for results. We're going to give you results. But then when it doesn't happen, where are you? So you have to have the experience and the wherewithal to say, that isn't how it works. You won't get those results. Here's what we can do.
I think that also ties into what we were talking about, like agency dynamics. An agency gets hired to show results in 3 months. And if you as a marketer don't understand that's not how it works, you can really churn through agencies, which isn't fair to anybody. And man, talk about super expensive. Like no B2B marketing team wants to churn through their budget like that. Yeah.
That's why being a practitioner is so important, or at least hiring one or having one on your team, right? Is critically important to understand those insights and how to work with agencies. Yeah.
And there are plenty of agencies who are great at this. I don't want to say every agency isn't qualified or doesn't do great work, but I think it's our responsibility on the brand side as B2B marketers to really understand what it is that we're looking for and expecting. And like Lee said, like what's realistic.
Yeah. And it's so important, because for our agency, as we intake clients and discuss potential opportunities, we want to make sure their expectations are aligned, right, with ours. And so that, identifying that right client it would help with, helping you sleep at night, basically, and not pulling out your hair. As you can see, mine is not there, but all
I
right.
don't know if you guys sleep very well at night.
Yeah, I don't sleep very well at night either.
I hear you, brother. All right, so now we're going to go to our segment called Bad, Bold, and Brilliant. And in this segment, we basically get all of our guests' opinion about a B2B campaign and to see if that campaign would be labeled bad, bold, or brilliant. You guys ready?
Yeah, I'm super
All
nervous
right,
about
so
this.
first case study is Salesforce. Okay, it's a B2B company that has cultivated a strong community of brand advocates and loyal customers. By focusing on customer experience, thought leadership, and community building, Salesforce hopes to strengthen their relationships with clients. This approach mirrors the strategies employed by other consumer brands like Apple, Starbucks, and so on. So they've ultimately built massive followings through their customer experiences. So is this Salesforce campaign a bad, bold, or brilliant campaign? Give me your thoughts.
I would say brilliant.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Carla.
No, I was going to say, I think when they launched it, absolutely brilliant, because they were so good at taking that consumer inspiration and making it work in a B2B environment. I think now it feels more bold because I don't know, have we become accustomed to audiences of 100,000s at their events, but I think it was a great move.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm a bit biased because a great part of my career was built off of being a Salesforce administrator. So I've been inside the ecosystem for a while, not anymore, but just being inside and seeing how they've grown over time and how they build the community. And I always see things that I think are brilliant. This is from a business capitalist standpoint, like the way they have their ecosystem of all the apps that plug into it, and how if it's good enough, they end up buying it. And then, it's a big monster of a machine, but I think the way it's been managed and grown and some of the marketing efforts too. I mean, I've got a Trailblazer jacket. Why would I have a Trailblazer jacket? Why would I wear a company's jacket? Well, it's quality. It was given to me at a steak dinner. So, that's marketing. I was fattened up and given a nice jacket. That's marketing. And, it's because of that, it's hard for me to talk junk about Salesforce. Now, I'm a HubSpot customer. I don't even have a HubSpot mug. So that says something.
It does. No, it does. And I think too, when I would say that it is brilliant as well, because when you look at what D2C brands are doing with regard to creating a massive following, people sort of want to belong to something. And that D2C brand is something that is more approachable, more connected to their lifestyle, versus B2B. It's like, okay, that's just a tool that I use for work. Right. But I think it's brilliant on Salesforce part because now their clients are a part of a community which they, of course, admire and are connected to, which is parallel with something that a D2C brand would have with their audience. Right. And so I think it basically fills that gap, right, or that bridge between the brand and the consumer, right, and an affinity for one. And so, yeah, I think it's certainly brilliant.
I made a mistake of wearing a Salesforce Trailblazer jacket the week after Dreamforce, and I was on a business trip in DC, and someone's like, "Oh, are you a dreamer?" I'm like, "What?
What?
Dreamforce was last week. Were you at Dreamforce?" I was like, "Oh yeah, I wasn't there. No, I just got a jacket, But it shows what you just said, the whole community part.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
I met Johnny Cupcakes last week, the guy who started the store, the bakeries that don't have any cupcakes, but they have T-shirts with cupcakes on them. And he has fans who get big cupcake tattoos on their necks and, all these commitment as a fan. I don't know that anybody's ever gotten a Salesforce tattoo. I don't want to
I'm sure they are.
completely
Somebody
unknowledgeable,
does.
but I think it's that rabid appreciation for the community that they've been brilliant at.
Absolutely. All right. So now we're going to pivot and talk about tools. But I want to get your opinion about tools that you cannot live without. And this could be an app, this could be a tactic, but share any tool that you can't live without and how you apply these tools to your personal or professional lives.
You gonna go?
You
Okay.
first.
Well, I'm going to use a business app, and I am a huge fan of Nimble. It's my CRM. And like for me, when I started my business 23 years ago, I used Act. Do you guys even remember that? Like the Act database.
Act, yeah.
And I've tried a lot of things over the years, but what I love about Nimble, it is for me, I'm not a big company. So easy to use. So it helps me run my life rather than running my life, in that I have to invest more time into it than it does into me. So that's my huge thing that I'm such a fanatic fan about, is Nimble and how it helps my business.
Nice. What about
Can
you?
I use a technology as a tool? Like AI is my tool. I mean, and it's not any one particular one. I mean, yeah, I use a lot of OpenAI, ChatGPT type stuff, but I bounce from one to the other for whatever I need. Mid-Journey for images, and ChatGPT for text, and Claude and Gemini. I use all of them typically for whatever the specific purpose that one is in the lead for at the moment. Like who's the leading image generator? Who makes the best type of photorealistic versus icon? That's what I couldn't live without now. The productivity boost that I've gotten from AI in the past couple of years is unreal. And it's always exciting to see how things are changing. Like, wow, I haven't bought a stock image in 2 years. Or, maybe that first draft of that contract I didn't have to go to my attorney for, those kind of things. So AI as a tool, I think, should almost be the front of everybody's. If you consider it a tool versus a technology, should be the front of everybody's work toolbox right now. And it's too early. It's hard to say any particular one tool, but if I had named one software, it'd be one that was AI based.
That makes sense. All right. Well, listen, we had a great conversation. Lee, I know you have a lot of things going on your end. Tell us what you're promoting now, where people can find you, any projects you're working on, things like that.
Yeah, well, right now I'm wrapping up a book. It's called Cash. As I mentioned earlier, I've had a lot of time working between sales and marketing and operations. And so Cash stands for Communications, Alignment, Systems, and Honesty. And so the book is due out, should be later on this year, sometime Q4. You can go ahead and get on my email list to learn about the journey and when the release is going to be. If you go to aleejudge.com/cash, then you can sign up for the early pre-launch list, and I'll tell you about it, and let you know when it's out. But that's the main thing, aleejudge.com/cash. And of course, my business, Content Monster, MONSTA, Content Monster, for creating content for your business.
Awesome. Carla, what about you?
I am really digging into, back to Lee's last response about, I call it the muse and the machine, and how we still keep our human creativity and use it to really help us see AI's true full potential. Because I think some people think, oh no, like everything human is going to go away and I'm going to lose my job. And I mean, Lee's the perfect example. It does it, like, it helps you supercharge your job. And I've talked to people who do podcasts, and they can now do more of them because AI helps them with all of the prep and production and so many things, that it just makes us more effective, especially as content producers, because I think we have more time to invest in the human side of what we do and get to know our audience and have some space to do that creative thinking. I mean, that's what I hear B2B marketers say all the time. I don't have any time. I don't have any time and space to just let my mind wander and think. So that's what I'm looking at, that juncture of is the muse and the machine. And I write a newsletter that comes out every other Tuesday called the Rethink Lab, where I share something that I'm rethinking, testing, looking at, learning. And people can go to my website at carlajohnson.co. There's no M. I say it's .co for the great state of Colorado, because I love Colorado. And you can sign up there.
Well, I'm your host, Jonte Delane, founder at Digital Delane, a full-service digital marketing agency. We help bring new brands, campaigns, and ideas to life. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Brand Behavior. We hope you've gained some valuable insights into how B2B marketers can learn from D2C brands. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform and visit our website at thebrandbehavior.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review and share it with your network. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.